What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and I'm here to talk to you about patch 14.24, going live to a server near you in about 1 week's time. We can still make some small changes, but it is unlikely that anything very drastic is going to be different from what's posted here. Reminder to myself, I might forget to talk about doing some minor rescripts to Renekton. I'll probably forget. Whatever. Let's go. So, major topics are Viktor, Warwick, and the generic live balance stuff that we will do pretty much every single patch. Let's go. So, Viktor is getting a bunch of new art. He's getting his model updated, new animations, new sound, the whole thing. New art for Viktor. We're also making changes to just about every single button on his kit. I think Viktor is a bit weak right now. So, it's good that we're buffing him. We maybe could have upped him sooner. We could have, of course, done some of this stuff earlier on. We didn't. Our bad. This is someone who hits through the cracks in terms of live balance. That's kind of our mistake. Regardless, one thing worth noting is his current win rate, as with pretty much any arcane champ who's not really, really easy, basically Jinx. Their pick rates all jumped by a ton by players who don't normally play them. That tends to lower win rates, some more than others. Again, Jinx is really, really simple. If you already play bot lane, you can play Jinx at 90% capacity. That is not true for immobile mages. That is not true for junglers and whatnot, is what it is. Either way, Viktor does have room for some buffs, so we're giving him some. We'll measure long-term what he's supposed to be at, but hey, here's some changes. So Viktor is a very, very old champion. His spells are very, very old. They have been built with old scripting practices. And so, hey, we've got some scripting updates. The first one is to his W. Technically, his W, like, if it were to always work perfectly, will actually stun slower in 1 week than it does on live. The problem is the old stun cadence was inconsistent. Through modern scripting practices, I don't know all the numbers. I did not do the data collection. I'm just sort of like lightly off to the side, kind of overseeing this. The designer in charge of shipping this update, as well as the playtesters who were like highly skilled mid laners and play Viktor, are like, this is an improvement, so I am trusting. The W is an improvement. It is more consistent. It is in some cases slower, in some cases much, much faster at stunning the target inside of them, and the fact that it's going to reliably actually stun on time should be a very big improvement. There are some small buffs to the slow. The slow itself is increased a bit, ranks 1 through 4. And additionally, a new mechanic is that it is going to slow you after it stuns you while you're still in the zone. So if it catches you at the start of the zone, you don't walk out, you'll be stunned, and then you'll not be stunned again, but you'll be slowed while then trying to leave the zone or staying in the zone and kiting or whatever. So that is a pretty big deal. It is simply going to slow more in most cases, and it will stun more consistently, which should be a pretty big feels win for Viktor players. The other big thing is has a new evolve. So the R evolve is that on takedown, with sort of like the Jinx passive thing going on, right? If you damage them recently and you get a takedown thing happens, the storm will grow in size and refresh part of its duration. So if you get 1 kill, it's more likely to get 2, to get 3, to get 4, to get 5. Viktor is basically going to be much better at teamfight cleanup and teamfight carrying. We think this is going to be a meaningful amount of win rate, of course, to the round. We're expecting like the total changes to be maybe 2%-ish win rate, like all said and done, the entire changes here. And of course, we've got a couple more things going on here. These are just small numbers changes. E mana cost going down by 10, Q shield buffed by something like 15 to 10, something around there by, it's a level scaler. So mostly in the early game, a little bit in the late game here as well. And then the passive getting a small tweak. This will generally be power positive. It's getting 5 fewer stacks on takedown, but 5 more stacks on cannon minion kill. That is generally going to be more often than you get a champion killer assist. So generally speaking, going to be an increase to the rate at which he upgrades his abilities and evolves them. So Viktor update, again, pretty clearly some substantial power positive here. Almost nothing here is actually win rate negative. So this is a pretty big swing on him. We'll measure over the course of time, but hey, here's Viktor, some meaningful buffs to him. Next is Warwick. We acknowledge we missed the mark somewhat on the Warwick changes from back in 22, I think was the patch for, or whenever we did the Warwick changes. That's our bad. We screwed up here. We've rebuilt the W attack speed once again to be better about this. So W should do a better job of tracking. If you damage them to below half health, you will get the empowerment. And it will also now, once again, if you see someone at below half and you start your swing, it will give you a good swing against that. So the old functionality of I see you're already low, let's go, that's there. The sort of bigger change here is you can actually keep the attack speed for longer. The attack speed is going to linger for, I think it's 2.5 seconds is the numbers. I don't remember exactly what the designer shows, but I think it's around 2.5 seconds. So you can use that to like get your attack speed off killing like a big raptor or something and like use it to then DPS the small raptors, whatever. This should be really significant feels. I think for his jungle clear, it'll feel really good. There's a compensation nerf, which is 2 base AD. Of course, his passive damage is how he heals himself, and so there's a lot of reasons not to change anything there, but 2 base AD is basically compensation nerf for some other buffs here. One other thing is the Q spell is getting a range increase, at least as far as I can recall, there's a range increase to the spell. Because the way Q is scripted under the hood is pretty convoluted ultimately, but what it comes down to is it does not natively scale with size bonuses, and so this is a just strict like baseline range increase to match the fact that his size is increased, and is the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, it's kind of like an empowered auto attack. I sort of made the suggestion that like, hey, this should like remain like X more units than an auto attack, and just like preserve that. So like, hey, whatever attack range he gained from size, we just give him to that as Q. As far as I can tell, the designer put that in. So cool stuff there. Again, the overall goal here is meant to be pretty close to win rate neutral. With the point being that like, hey, we missed on some of the field stuff here. Let's make Warwick feel a bit better. All right, now we go on to basically normal stuff here, a slew of small buffs. Master Yi, I said I wanted to bring Crit Yi back. I want to give some context here. I don't think, actually, after talking with some other people, that Crit Yi should be quite as good or better than on Hit Yi. Basically, the reason here is Crit Yi's build will almost certainly be really Q focused and use quick blades, or flicker blades as they're called now. And the problem with that is it means that Yi will be constantly untargetable, and there is an amount of untargetability that is kind of unreasonable to give a champion. And the more he's about Q and constantly being out of combat, the more frustrating the champion he is. And so that is a meaningful concern. That is, very reasonable to think about. Also, to the fact that most crit items don't give durability, whereas most on-hit items do. Blade of the Ruin King, lifesteal. Rage Blade, okay, nothing there at all, but like Wit's End, durability, Terminus, durability. For crit items, you got basically Shield Bow, and that's it. So it would actually make him more of a glass cannon. Again, I still think it should be a viable alt build, right? I just think it should probably be, on average, better to play on Hit Yi, but that Crit Yi should just not be Troll. Which is why it's getting buffed, right? If it's like, no, this is unacceptable, we wouldn't buff it, but it's like, hey, we're buffing this. A quick note on the math of the Q crit scaling here. The way it was hooked up is basically you would get, I'm trying to think like the right way to describe it. Essentially, the old way the crit damage was built in, it functionally punished Infinity Edge. The damage increase of the crit damage of IE was actually undervalued here, and so I rebuilt the calculation to value IE appropriately, so that IE does the same like amount of multiplicative scaling that it does to other like normal crit things. Though it's still not going to like crit at 1.75x or 2.15x. Like we're still lowering his crit damage overall, but we're now lowering it fairly so that IE is not like improperly punished, essentially. Again, the goal here is not that it's going to be better than on Hit Yi, but bring it up to closer to viability, basically. Next, buffs to Rel. We simply undershot on the power level here. That's our bad. We thought it was going to be neutral or maybe slightly positive to Rel. It clearly was not. We're looking for about 2% worth of win rate here to Rel. We're happy by lowering her CC. We're happy with some of the like simplifications and streamlining to the kit, but she's obviously just too weak right now as a champion. So we're buffing her base HP by a meaningful amount here. We're buffing the amount of armor and MR steal through her passive by 50%. Both the like minimum cap and the percent. So just all context is going to be stealing 50% more resists than before. It was already buffed a little bit last patch, so it's a pretty meaningful increase in her stealing, which is both her target dies faster and she's tankier when fighting. And then also a both base and percent max HP buff to the shield, considering that like 700 health is pretty much just default at level 1 with like regular, even if you take like the scaling shard. This is like 17 more shield or so at rank 1, like 30 or so more shield, like, in the mid game. So pretty meaningful there. Again, 30 health as well, more passive steal. The goal is 2%. If we don't hit 2%, we will buff Rel again. If we overshoot, we'll nerf her if there is a like pick rate, ban rate problem. But buffs to Rel, mostly around durability and her unique output of siphoning from others. Now that she has less crowd control, it's like, well, I don't want to like give her just a ton of damage. She's a supportive tank. She's meant to be playing around other people. It's even kind of canonically like lore accurate to be helping other people. Like she's supposed to learn to work well. Thanks for the assist. Didn't expect that. So anyway, yeah, trying to play up the cooperative aspects of Rel, and specifically the more unique cooperative aspects of Rel, which is the assist steal to help someone kill faster. Rumble, pretty simple stuff here. Rumble does have, I think, some Some flaws still in the kit. Things I didn't identify as important or I'd overbuffed or whatever because I did like the Rumble update last year or whatever. Essentially, I don't want to spend too much time on this one. I think Rumble still has flaws in his landing phase pattern. I think overheating is probably too much of an upside compared to being like, well, you did it, but whatever. I think he wins a little bit too hard while overheating. I think that should be something you can maybe be more able to punish. But regardless, he is very weak right now, looking at solo queue data, looking at, even high mastery Rumble players. Rumble doesn't have a ton of mains. He's always going to have depressed win rate. Rumble will never be 50% win rate while being balanced because he doesn't have enough mains for that, and he's hard. But he is weak, even accounting for that fact. And so this is giving him some scaling because I think his landing phase is pretty like, I don't want to say like dominant necessarily, but it's like low volatility and feels like he always has the upper hand. Like if Rumble plays correctly, it basically feels like there's nothing you can do about him. And so we're like, well, we've nerfed his early game a decent amount. We've probably not done all of the requisite work to make him have like a fair laning phase. It might be that his spell shapes just are not conducive to that. Like maybe E is supposed to be back on like 2 charges, 1 cooldown, like it's Ahri ult, and not like holding 1 at all times, holding 2 at all times. I'm not sure. This is like random ideas. None of these are going to happen anytime soon. We know there are flaws with Rumble's kit. Regardless, this is like, well, here, let's just play up your late game then, because that is safer. We're playing up damage and durability, not just damage. I am always like very cognizant of like, we can't just say, well, here's some late game damage as the compensation, because that's how we get really explosive rocket tag late game team fight. So I try to always be cognizant of not doing too much of a damage creep in any given patch. I generally try to do a pretty good job of that one. I'm not going to say I'm perfect here, but that's the hope in a lot of these cases. So there's the Rumble change. For Twitch, we are buffing Twitch Q. He is a bit weak. Now, I want to point out that Twitch is one of few hard AD carries. And for most AD carries in the game, and actually you can, there's a lot of ways to track this, but like, just trust me, it's true. Most AD carries are easy in the sense that like, if you're already a bot laner, the skills are very transferable. And so very few AD carries have appreciable mastery curves. Because you can just, if you can already play Josana, you can already play Jinx. He's like almost always true. But there's about half dozen champions where that's not as true. This is Draven, this is Callista, this is Twitch, this is Samira, Aphelios is this, and then Zeri to a moderate degree as well. There's probably 1 or 2 more, but like those are like the big 6. So Twitch is a champion who, if he's balanced around what you're doing, he's supposed to be sub 50. If Twitch is ever above 50, this champion is almost certainly comically overpowered. Because unlike every other AD carry in the game, you actually have to main him to get all the power out of him, and most players don't main Twitch. So most players who play Twitch are lowering his win rate by being bad at him. You can't lower Jinx's win rate by being bad at her, because there's nothing to be bad at. Or Ashe, or Varus, all those things. Anyway, regardless, Twitch is slightly weak, but again, I'm going to say slightly weak with that in mind. Is his kit perfect? I'm not going to say that. But in terms of like pure, like, accurately measuring win rate data, he's a little bit weak, and that's it. Regardless, buffs for Twitch, because again, a little bit weak, give him a little bit something, okay, fine. So it's his Q duration going up by 1 second. A big driver of this is simply having the duration match the duration of R. He gets to have his attack speed for as long as he is empowered in his R. I think that is a very reasonable thing to have those things line up and tie together. In fact, Q could probably be a little bit longer than R, so we can like come out of his Q, attack once or twice, then press R later. That would also be reasonable, so we can like bump this even more down the line, sure. But 1 second attack speed duration is going to, at some point, give win rate. And then a simple 5% increase to the attack speed of Q itself. Simple DPS increase, not a whole lot to say here. This might be pretty meaningful since most of Twitch's combat is during the Q buff. Anytime it like really matters, he's gone into stealth and used his buff here. So I think this is going to be the primary win rate lift here and should be pretty decent. Next up, our buffs to Yuumi. Yuumi is statistically probably the weakest conventional support right now in League of Legends. Yuumi is actually pretty difficult to play, right? I talked about transfer skills for AD carry. The same is true for supports. Yes, Yuumi is very, very good for your like first game of League ever because it doesn't test as many skills, and that's cool. But also, learning how to ward on Yuumi is a unique experience that if you're already a diamond support or whatever, or a silver support or whatever, you could go play Janna or go play Zyra and like understand a lot of support basics around map rotations and recall timings and when to roam for objectives. And like these are equally transferable skills and warding and whatnot. For Yuumi, they're all different because your move speed is like 325 and you're like, I want to get to the fight up there for grubs. How? You have to learn. It's a Yuumi specific skill, right? How to get to grubs with 325 move speed. And how to go ward when you get one shot by anyone looking at you the wrong way. You cannot dodge anything. You can't flash. You don't have any move speed. Blitz will always kill you. It's a thing to learn, right? So Yuumi does have win rate deflation because she's actually hard for experienced League players. She's easy for new League players and hard for experienced League players. Interesting, right? Regardless, with all that in mind, Yuumi is still one of the worst supports in the game among experienced players, which means this champion is weak overall. And I am personally fine with Yuumi mains being able to like succeed the appropriate amount on the champion they main. I think that's completely reasonable. Yuumi's actually generally a pretty popular champion, actually. She's actually pretty compelling. Personally also enjoy playing Yuumi, whatever. Point is, an aside here is that currently maxing Q on Yuumi is a trap. It is actually her worst ability max. I mean, maybe maxing W is actually weaker, but like her highest win rate build is actually EW max. It's like measurably better than QE or EQ, which isn't always a problem. I've said a couple times here, but I think it's relatively important to have the intuitive skill order at least not be bait. And so this is strict buffs to maxing Yuumi Q. So theoretically, EW max Yuumi is unchanged entirely. Rank 1 Q is not different as a spell at all, but the damage and mana cost of Q are getting buffed by 5 in each context. So the mana cost, instead of being plus 10 per rank, plus 5 per rank. The damage on Q, extra 5, whether unempowered or empowered, just plus 5 flat damage per rank on Q. So small buffs here. Again, even for most of the Emax Yuumis, they are doing EQ. So even, the like second most common Yuumi build is still getting a buff here, but the most common build is getting an even bigger buff by maxing Q right away. Overall, just saying, Yuumi isn't deserving of buffs. We are giving her these, numbers increased here. Not much else to say. Cool. Next is Poppy. This is an adjustment. It is a buff and a nerf. The last set of changes we did around base AD and attack speed helped with the support versus top jungle skew. So we're doing it again because we really thought we were going to get more movement off of 3 base AD for a champ who buys a Sheen item and goes Halo Blades. Like, oh, you really care about this 3 base AD. You're applying it constantly when you're doing actual combat. And like, somehow the compensation for attack speed almost made up for it completely. I mean, I understand that like Poppy wouldn't use 3 base AD quite as much as another class would, but still surprising that like taking 12 damage off of her all-in didn't do anything. So we're doing another adjustment because she's still probably the best support in the game. And again, we think that jungle and top lane Poppy are in a reasonable spot, so we're trying to do compensations where we expect to roughly tread water in top jungle and roughly lose win rate in support, with a little bit of variance. Like this might be like plus 0.15 in top lane or whatever, and like only minus 0.6 in support, but that's the goal, right? Is make this adjustment, because if we can ever be like, just nerf by 1% win rate flat, great, right? If we can get the skew back, then that's this free real estate, right? So nerfing base armor by, I think it's 3, buffing armor growth to where at level 18 it's 2 higher. Now, to be clear, that is clearly a nerf, right? Not breaking even till level 11 or later is like very clearly power negative. Like that is just strictly win rate negative. But the fact that it gets back based on levels means that higher level roles, top and jungle, will be less effective than support Poppy, who just may not even hit that break even point. Now, 3 armor by itself would usually be close-ish to 1% win rate. Obviously, making up for it means it's going to be less than 1% win rate. Cool. The next change is Q, and this is why I think the support nerf is probably under 1% win rate. Q is nerfed at rank 1 and 2. It is equal at rank 3, and then it is buffed at rank 4 and 5, with an increase to the AD ratio as well. Now, for support Poppy, it is, again, nerfed at level 1, 2, 3, 4. It is technically slightly buffed at level 5, but if that early laning phase mattered for her, then she's getting a little bit more damage later, but not getting that much going on. I think realistically, this is not a really large nerf to Poppy support. It is a nudge down. It is a tap. It is trying to get the skew to the right spot, where if we can do a flat nerf later, we can, or it might just be enough that she's not quite as good of an early bully where Poppy stops feeling like the number 1 support and we can just kind of rest and it's okay. We'll see. That's the point here though, right? Is preserve the other roles, lower bases, buff scaling, and think we're okay. Next up are the nerfs. We finally have the first set of Ambessa nerfs. I'm going to spend a little time here about the theoretical balance state of Ambessa and how we can't land it yet. I think it wouldn't be possible yet. So I've talked a lot about using high mastery win rates. I think it's a very fair measurement as like step 1 for like an objective measure, and then making your subjective choices from there. But there is a very strong bias here that we know is true. We've tested for it and we know it's true, which is playing games close together means more than playing games farther apart. So like we'll say, hey, you're a mastery 10 Yasuo player. If you went from mastery 1 to mastery 10 in a month, that is going to drive a lot more win rate growth than going mastery 1 to mastery 10 over the course of 2 years. And like this is very easy to measure and test and be like, yep, that's clearly true. And of course, intuitively it's true as well, but it is indeed true for like reality, which means, a Mastery 8 Ambessa had to have gotten that over the course of 4 weeks. That's a lot of Ambessa games back to back to back to back. Your average Mastery 8 Yasuo, who's playing like right now, probably didn't put all those games in 4 weeks, which means it's not even apples to apples. Like I can say, well, Mastery 8 Ambessa is this win rate, and Mastery 8 like Aurelia or Fiora or Yone or, Riven is at this number. But that's not a fair comparison because Ambessa's number will be higher because we can, like the only way you're Mastery 8 is when you played a ton of games back to back to back and really, really learn the champion. And you have you had no skill decay, right? And so that's actually fake. Okay, is Mastery 8 Ambessa actually more like Mastery 20 Riven? Is that actually the fairer comparison? I don't have that for you. I don't have like the morphing function of how you turn one to another because it also varies by the champion. Jinx doesn't care how recently played the games because she's really easy to play. Riven obviously cares. Yasuo obviously cares. Yone obviously cares. Katarina cares. Ambessa cares. And so it's like, well, if we ignored that mechanic, Ambessa would be like 5% overpowered. But the mechanic is real, which means she's not 5% overpowered. She's some other number overpowered. Is it 4? Is it 3? I would guess it's more closer to like 4 and change, don't get me wrong. But like, hey, the numbers are here, right? We don't have a completely fair objective measurement here because there's inherent bias with the fact that Ambessa is a brand new champion. Now, regardless, Ambessa is very clearly overpowered. Of course she is. And there's a really good chance that the long-term balance state for Ambessa, I'm talking like 3.5 years, is 48% win rate, Yone Yasuo levels of like high agency, a lot of mobility, a lot of outplay tools, infinitely long, deep mastery curve. And so we should expect to see a sub 50 win rate. That might be Ambessa long-term, right? To be clear. But we launched her at 42, knowing that a day one 42% win rate was overpowered. We knew that. That was so that people basically wouldn't grief their team by taking the champion, and then being like, yeah, if you're really good at her, congratulations, you managed to outrace the balance changes. Okay, whatever. Of course, because Ambessa is overpowered, even her bad matchups that are like -4% don't make up for the fact that Ambessa is already probably 4% overpowered, which means of course you can blind pick her even against the worst matchups because the worst matchup just makes up for the amount of win rate you have in the first place by just being OP, right? By just learning your champion overall in the first place. So this is all to say, yes, Ambessa is OP. I don't have a really good theory to like provide you on like what is the correct way to tune champions for their first 6 months. I know for Hui, we launched him at like 38% win rate. We trickled in a few buffs over time to get him to like 47, 48. I thought that was kind of reasonable personally. And I went and said as much. I think you can go back and like read patch note context that I wrote personally. And it was like, we're buffing Hui. We don't think he's actually underpowered long term, but players are still bad at him. So we're going to move him from 46 to 47.5 because, well, you've got solo queue Huis right now in your games. And like, yeah, when people master him, he's probably OP in like 2026 or something, but like they're still bad at him right now, so have some win rate. I think that is acceptable. I think I would still defend how we've balanced Hui over time. I think that's been totally reasonable. Again, I think Ambessa is very OP right now, and of course we're nerfing her. So I have 2 more thoughts here. One is I think Ambessa is OP in almost all axes. And by that I mean like, well, she's very, very fast. And so because she's very fast, she should only have so much damage and only be so durable, right? Okay, cool. And we're probably going to leave the speed in. And by having her be that fast, it probably means that she's supposed to be like a 47, 48% winner champion, like really, really long term after all the champ mastery. Like, I think that's probably true. And that she's supposed to be in like the Yone area, right? I think that's probably true. We'll see, but that's what I think is likely true. You look at like champions like Lee Sin. Lee Sin does not feel weak. Lee Sin is still sub 50 win rate. Does anyone care? Nope, Lee Sin's great. Ambessa can be the same thing potentially, right? So she's very fast, and we can account for that in win rate. That's fine, right? But yeah, she's like really fast. Of course she is. But she also does too much damage, and she's too durable. Remember, this champ launched at 42% win rate because people are bad at her, right? And if you look at like her early game data from the first patch, it was like she was getting first blooded, she was losing her tower, she was like getting crushed in the early game because people are bad at her, right? Of course. And so if you look at data, you're like, wow, Ambessa's a scaling champion. It's like, well, that's survivorship bias. If they didn't surrender at 15, they were good enough at Ambessa to like then win the game later on. Congratulations. But most Ambessas were getting stomped early because they're bad at Ambessa. Is Ambessa actually a weak laner? I don't think so. Is Ambessa actually a strong laner? Probably. And so most of the changes are some durability, some damage, and I would say more than not shaped for the early game. So let's finally talk about the Ambessa changes themselves. They've been on screen for a while, but let's go. We are nerfing the shield duration from 2 seconds to 1.5. we are nerfing the amount of the shield itself. The ratio going from 1.75 to 1.5, and nerfing the base shield from 85 to 350, which is level scaled, to 50 to 320. This is a 35 plus 0.25 bonus AD ratio plus 0.5 second duration nerf to the level 1 shield. And the like numerical amount of that shield nerf actually grows with time because even level 18 number, the other way around, sorry. The amount of nerf is basically flat because like the level 18 number is minus 30, the level 1 number is minus 35. But the ratio is down by 0.25, so it's mostly an early game focused nerf here. And that is to make her laning phase feel more assailable now that players have learned how to lane with her a bit better. And by the way, still, even in her current data, she's like slightly disfavored to win lane, again, because players are bad at her. I'm not saying she's actually a bad laner. We're in fact nerfing her lane for the most part. And then because I don't think it's reasonable to only nerf the durability in this champion, we're nerfing the AD ratio on E at ranks 2 through 5. E has very little context to it. E basically always deals damage. There's something to really dodge there. She just kind of hits you. And so this is like lower guaranteed late game damage, especially when snowballed, because I mean, honestly, Ambessa's late game snowball damage is of course too high. And so it's a pretty meaningful nerf to some of her gold scaling. E hits twice, so it's like a 0.4 bonus AD ratio nerf in a real combo. Yeah, she's too lethal and too tanky. We're hitting tankiness more than damage, I would say, on average here. But especially going for like putting her, so like one other way I'm going to phrase this, right, is Ambessa is some amount of overpowered, right? And she still will be. Like, just people are going to be bad at her. She's going to have like a 47% win rate next patch, or 48, and she's still going to be OP, right? And she's going to like crawl back up to 49 and still be OP, and we'll nerf her again. She'll be up to like 47, she'll still be OP, and you know, whatever, right? Or maybe bounce finally in like 2 years at 47, or something like that. And as I said, like several things about her are overtuned because she's overtuned, right? And what this is mostly doing is saying, okay, your very, very early laning phase, your level, 1, 2, 3, is close to what is actually balanced here. And then, yeah, your level 18 durability, probably still a bit too high, but people are bad at you. Your level 18 damage, probably still a bit too high, but, people are bad at you. Your level 7 damage, probably a little bit too high, but people are bad at you. I think that is like a reasonable assessment of where Ambessa is at post these changes. We'll always keep looking, seeing what people are doing in pick rate, in ban rate, in performance, all these things. But these are the Ambessa nerfs. This is what we're doing this patch. Okay, cool. Next are some very simple nerfs to Corki. So Corki is another one where measuring mastery is very awkward because if you do a blind sample of mastery, how many bot lane Corki players are mastery 20 from old Corki versus new Corki? Worth noting that obviously, like if you look at share of players by champ mastery, there's more high mastery mid laners than bot laners because for the last 10 years he's been a mid laner. So of course that's where the high mastery players are because they've been playing Corki over there. But even with that in mind, even accounting for champ mastery, Corki appears to still be a bot lane skewed champion. I know in Kespa Cup right now he had 7 picks mid, 3 picks bot. Corki feels like he's allowed to be one of the safe blinds. I mean, Corki is a very, very good early laner. We do need to pull back his early game more. Looking like comparing him to say someone like Draven or Callista, he's actually more early game skewed than those champions. And so we can like pull down some of that early game skew, give him some late game. Like we've got room to give him some more late game down the line if we need to. That's all fine. Still have to be cognizant of his mid versus bot stuff. But yeah, Corki, pretty high pro presence. Probably a little bit OP long term, especially with just how good he's early game. So this is pretty much just a simple early game focus nerf. Minus 20 base damage on E, minus 0.1 on the bonus AD ratio on E. This is just like, hey, he just kind of Valkyries at you, presses E and like right clicks, and he just wins the stat check by a ton. And so let's just pull those numbers down a little bit and make him a little bit less overbearing in that regard. Next is Elise, just moving on, because simple Corki nerf. Elise, minus 30 base health, not much to say. This is basically preserving that we think Elise should be pretty assassin-y, and so she's a bit OP. Let's keep her damage, let's let her be bursty, let's let that still be a strong thing. She's early game skewed, that will still be true. 30 base health is not going to ruin that by any means. She's an early game focused AP jungle assassin, that's still there. You're a bit squishier. Okay, fine, right? She has spider length to tank, she's ranged half the time, she's allowed to be on the squishier side. Totally reasonable. Graves, just tapping down some damage. He's got a bit too much. He's a little bit OP. Want to point out that he lost 1% win rate last patch from Yomu's and Collector changes. Players do not seem to notice that at all. Normally when you nerf champ by 1% win rate, you see you at least see a momentary spike down in pick rate and ban rate. Graves saw nothing because players just don't intuit indirect changes. We saw literally 0 player behavior changes on Graves on pick or ban rate, so no one just thought about the fact that Yomu's and Collector are his 2 most common items. is what it is. What it means, though, is that Graves is, using blind math, technically balanced. Like, if you only look at like mastery win rate, Graves is balanced. Now, again, mentioned it many times, that is only the first step here. There's more to the equation than just, well, what's the high mastery win rate? Graves has room to be nerfed a little. This is basically one line saying, hey, we're dropping your Q2 bonus AD ratio by 0 to 0.2 by rank. It's not huge, but it's still about a 10% AD ratio nerf. Like 10% of the AD ratio going away of Q as a spell. I don't expect this to be a very large nerf. I expect it to be, 0.5% win rate or so. But some of the point here is to get him into the patch notes because players did not clock the 1% win rate he lost last patch. And so here, it's back. He's in the patch notes. He's been nerfed, really, trust me. And I'm hoping this is enough that players will realize that his balance state is probably more appropriate. Again, I think this champion is supposed to sit like technically slightly below numerically balanced because of how much agency and like ability to take over the game he has. But again, this puts him into what I think is relatively balanced, and hopefully players clock his power level as reasonable. LeBlanc, fairly simple change here. LeBlanc is extremely high in ban rate for her power level. Her win rates look pretty reasonable overall, so we're swinging pretty delicately here. Just taking away some flat damage. Basically this is the undodgeable poke damage in lane. I mean, she can Q auto you, she can QW you. If she QWs, that's 10 damage off the combo. If she's a Q for poke, it's 5. That matters some. So just some damage down on LeBlanc. Dr. Mundo, more damage nerfs here. I mean, this champ is doing very, very, very well. He's happy with the current state of items and whatnot. He's happy with all the health items. I mean, we buffed a lot of them. We made them not garbage, and so the health stacker is happy. Not a big surprise there. This is just Mundo's doing far too well, especially in lower MMRs. His late game damage is very, very, very high. And so we're doing the age-old tactic of the health to bonus AD ratio going down. And if he wants to build Titanic, if he wants to build Overlord's Bloodmail and get the AD through items, he's allowed to do that. That is meant to be supported here. That's what those items are for. And the more we can say, hey, Mundo, if you want the damage, go build the damage thing. We have items for you. These are their purposes. Means I think it's fine to keep lowering his free damage and then actually invite him to make that choice. Next is Riven. Small Riven nerf, just nerfing the base shield by 10. Not much to bring up here. It's a pretty small nerf. The designer elected to basically keep the recent damage buffs to let Riven feel like very lethal and fast and deadly, which she definitely does. Of course, the champion is quite overpowered, so a nerf to the shield. Next is Swain. I've done a couple videos now about this. I mentioned Swain a little earlier. My last video on the channel is about changes in like mastery data and where players come in from. Essentially, the Swain's win rate when accounting for mastery is unchanged on current live patch compared to before the rework. Now that said, Swain's player base is in some cases like 5x. His mid lane player base is 5x or 6x what it was before. Support's like 1.5 or something like that. Swain, per win rate is massively more popular. So I still consider this a resounding success. Pick rate's actually still increasing with time. It's actually not decaying down. So very happy that Swain is more popular, feeling better. That's cool stuff. That said though, this is a very, very high win rate for this champion, or just high win rate for a champion in general. Also, his ban rate is climbing, which means his opponents are noticing that Swain is a pretty strong champion. Some ban rate increases happen because the champion gets more popular. That's always going to happen to a certain degree, but also this is a champ who's just doing too well overall. And so we're taking some nerfs down. Swain is particularly overperforming in bot lane as a bot lane AP carry. He's also still too good in mid, and so trying to find nerfs that very lightly skew towards bot mid. There's no way to not get collateral on support here. It's just not going to really be possible. But going for armor and armor growth kind of conjoined is about like 0.8% win rate worth roughly. The point of this is, hey, bot lane is filled with physical damage. Mid lane is not always. Like one of the recent buffs for Swain was actually giving him bonus MR, which was meant to be a mid lane skewed buff because that's where we thought there was some room. To be clear, like the space he is most overpowered in is in bot lane, but again, room to be nerfed everywhere. So Swain, again, OP, nerfing armor growth, right? Growth stats tend to skew towards solo lanes, so that will hit mid some. Armor overhits bot lane. Now, yes, of course, Swain support will also interact with his armor, but Swain bot levels up more than Swain support. And so, fingers crossed, Swain bot feels this a bit more than Swain support. We would like to keep that role safe if possible. Swain support doesn't appear meaningfully overpowered. It may be a touch over, right? If we're meant to be a little bit cautious around mage supports overall. But again, fairly generic nerfs here, meant to be a little bit bot and mid skewed. Swain. And then finally, we have nerfs to Talon. So Talon is getting a nerf of 3 base MR, and his passive monster mod is going from 1.2x to 1.1x. The goal here being about 1% win rate. We could have potentially aimed for a little bit more here on Talon. it's interesting. Talon is like measurably high elo skewed, and it's actually for two reasons. One, he's relatively hard, right? He has a bunch of unique mechanics that are Talon only, and so you have to like learn Talon, not just be good at assassins. And two, he is a little bit early game skewed as well, and so that tends to also trend towards early game champions. And so these nerfs I expect to be slightly early game skewed. I mean, base MR is something that still does matter across game time, but should be pretty meaningful for his landing phase as well, and so it should very lightly handle that. Regardless, his Talon has extremely inflated base MR, and so it's bringing it down some to just hit win rate goals, basically, because I don't think there's a strong reason for Talon to be very, very magic resist inflated right now. Maybe for some reason, down the line I'll have to bring it back, but right now it doesn't seem like an important thing there. So those are basically all the big buffs and nerfs. There's one final thing, which I said I was going to bring up, and I will. There is a very, very small under the hood update to Renekton. I say small. I basically re-scripted the data flow for his Q, W, and E. There are no numerical changes here. All functionality is preserved entirely, unless I made a mistake, which I don't think I did. But it's basically hooking up how it calculates damage and armor shred and all these other bits of data into more modern practices, so that if we want to like change his stun duration in a specific game mode, it's really, really easy going forward in the future. Because, hey, Swift Play is coming out, right, and cool stuff there. The other thing is a tooltip update to Renekton Q. I think I mostly only changed Q. I think it was a small update to the E. But basically, several of the mechanics of Renekton's spells were not spelled out in the tooltip, either in the base tooltip or in the rules text holding shift. And so I moved some things around, rewrote it, and moved where the context was and the rules text was, so that Q is a bit easier to read at a baseline, and then there's actual like more accurate rules text for Q when you hold shift, as well as the rank ups. Like there's a heal cap on Q that changes on rank up that like I think wasn't expressed anywhere, or like the cap was like only expressed on the empowered heal, but it was actually on both halves. It was like there's just stuff that we're just not showing players, and so just updated the tooltip for stuff like that. And that is the patch. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.